Okay, so first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here to this afternoon's um, WIN meeting about the meaning of May Day. Finn is going to lead off, doing an introduction to it all. Finn, do you know how long you want to speak for?
20 minutes,
All
thereabouts.
right.
Yeah,
Finn, do you want me to tell you when you've been going for
yeah,
15? Yeah,
yes.
all right.
Okay.
Okay, go on, kick off then.
Well, comrades, this is a significant discussion because the marches and demonstrations that took place across the globe in Africa, Asia, Europe, America on May Day and the days immediately following show the international nature of the organised labour movement, and also it situates the organised workers at the centre of the social transformation of society. It's important on a day like May Day to reflect on the history of the event, and the event is contains lots and lots of sacrifices from workers in many countries. So I begin by just reflecting on a couple of these significant May Day events. In 1975, there was a revolution in Ethiopia where the emperor, the absolute monarch, was overthrown. And a May Day event was held in Ethiopia, attended by 30,000 people, and they picked May Day as a day to express the newfound freedom. In Spain, 2 years after Franco had died, a May Day march was called, which was attacked by the police, and many people were injured, and 300,000 turned out on the streets of Madrid following that. In Turkey, there was a massive May Day rally in Istanbul on May the 1st, 1977, organised by the Labour Federation. 36 people were killed on that May Day demonstration, and 300 were wounded. Subsequent May Day marches were held also in Istanbul, even though there was a curfew on people marching. In Iran, in 1979, on May the 1st, again May Day was selected. There was a huge rally in Tehran, even though the Shah had banned a May Day march. It's also important to look at some of the earlier struggles before May Day became a significant international event. There was an event in Kashmir, which I learned about from Umar Khurshid, where he spoke about an event in Kashmir in 1865, 21 years before the Haymarket Square events in Chicago, which I'll deal with later. 21 years before that, and it was a demonstration by Kashmiri shawl weavers. It was attacked by the police, and 28 people were killed. Over 100 were wounded, and many of the leaders were imprisoned and tortured. So the struggles of the labour movement didn't come easy. There was a lot of sacrifice, a lot of bloodshed, and May Day is part of that tradition. A socialist leader was hanged in Japan, uh, Shosui Kokotu, and 11 other leaders of the labour movement who were involved in setting up the Socialist Party in Japan. Shosui Kotoku and 11 others were hanged. And I'm mentioning these events to show that the sacrifices that have been made are not often appreciated. Some of the Labour leaders who speak on May Day think it's just a nice day out, making kind of mild, moderate speeches, forgetting the huge sacrifices that were made to enable that event to take place. Now, I want to focus a bit on the United States because this is where the movement began. The May Day events began in the US. Now, we hear from Trump all the time about MAGA, Make America Great Again, as though America has always been a capitalist country and its greatness flowing from the exploitation of other countries. In fact, it's a very strong labor tradition, and that's where the roots of May Day are, in Chicago. Chicago, of course, is in the media again recently with the election of the Catholic Pope, who apparently comes from Chicago, but this is more significant than his election. There was a rally called for May the 1st in 1886 by the trade unions in Chicago. And that was the culmination of years of struggle to reduce the hours of the working day. In 1867, a long time before the 1886 march, there was a demonstration in Chicago for an 8-hour day. And an 8-hour day law was enacted, but it wasn't enforced. And a lot of governors were able to avoid bringing that thing into operation. There was also demonstrations in other cities in the United States. Interestingly, there was a general strike in Philadelphia in 1835 for a 10-hour day. So you can see, even with the huge destruction of personal lives that a 10-hour day represented, there was a general strike to achieve that because a lot of people were working in excess of that. And the demand was that they would work from 6 to 6 with 2 hours for meals. And that was the 10-hour day in terms of work. That was a demand in 1835. By the time 1886 came around, the 8-hour day was the central demand. And Karl Marx made this comment. He said that out of the death of slavery, now the American Civil War was in 1861 to 65, but he said that out of the death of slavery, a new life at once arose. And Marx said that the first fruit of the Civil War was the 8-hour agitation from the Atlantic to the Pacific. One of the earlier unions in America, the National Labor Union, said, this is a quote again, the first and great necessity of the present is to free the labor of this country from capitalistic slavery, and this will be achieved by the passing of a law to enable 8 hours, or to force an 8-hour day as the normal working day in all the states of the American Union. So the 8-hour day in America was seen as a revolutionary demand in terms of changing society. And a lot of states, even before the Chicago events, had already introduced the 8-hour day as standard. In 1867, 10,000 people marched through Chicago fighting for an 8-hour day. The unions that emerged in America originally, the Knights of Labor and such organizations as the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions of the United States and Canada, that was formed in 1881 and was more militant than the Knights of Labor. They were calling also for the 8-hour day. It's worth noting also other sacrifices that were made by the trade unions and struggle workers who were engaged in struggle in America. 20 workers were hanged in the anthracite mines in Pennsylvania a decade before the events in Haymarket Square in Chicago. These would have been principally mainly Irish workers. There was an all-day gun battle in Homestead, Pennsylvania, against the Pinkerton detectives. This was a private agency that employers and government agencies would employ to infiltrate unions, to intimidate workers, to protect scabs, and to break strikes. So there's a long, long history of bloody and dangerous struggle. But in Haymarket, a mass demonstration was called on the 8-hour day in Haymarket Square for the 8-hour day in Chicago. As the meeting was coming to a close, a bomb was thrown. And as a result, and the police, of course, fired indiscriminately, killing 11 people, and hundreds were injured in police fire. Following that demonstration, 8 of the leaders of the movement, none of whom could have been involved in throwing the bomb, most of whom were actually on the platform when the meeting was taking place, 8 were sentenced to death by hanging. Now, 3 of those had their sentences commuted to a prison term, and another one of these leaders died in his cell in prison. It's not clear whether he killed himself or whether he was killed by the goons. But 4 men were hanged, and they were all socialists. They were all part of the labor and socialist traditions in America. Albert Parsons, he was in the Socialist Working Men's Party. George Engel, he was in the International Working Men's Association. That was the First International. August Spies was in the Socialist Labour Party. And the fourth man was Adolf Fischer, who was in the Central Labour Union. They were hanged. There were protests in many, many cities against the hanging. And when the hanging had been accomplished and the men had been killed, judicially killed was the expression that was used. Incidentally, Engels referred to that killing in these judicial murders in Chicago, and so too did Jack London, referred to these what he called judicial executions, judicial murder. The judge was prejudiced, and the jury was carefully selected and biased. But then, following that, there were protests right across the world. There was a big march in London uh, through Hyde Park, at which Engels was on the platform. Engels spoke at that meeting, and so too did Eleanor Marx, the leader of the gas workers. Now, this was a couple of years after the killing, after the executions. There were marches in Dublin as well. Now, the significant thing about these marches were that the Second International, which was formed in 1889, called for a one-day day of action on the 8-hour day issue for all workers in every country. And May the 1st, 1890, was an international day of action, and the demand was for an 8-hour day. So the 8-hour day was very much associated with the socialist movement. Now, there were divisions, of course, in the Socialist International between reformists and revolutionaries and Marxists and others, but nonetheless, they were united on one thing, that socialism was the answer to society's problems. Now, whether they wanted to achieve it bit by bit, or whether they wanted to achieve it through revolutionary organization, there were differences about that question, but they were all united about the need to transform society along socialist lines. So the May the 1st, 1890, which is the day that was called by the International for an international demonstration for an 8-hour day, the response was tremendous in many countries. For example, in Brazil, there were demonstrations in Sao Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro. There were demonstrations in Germany where 100,000 people marched through Hamburg. There were demonstrations in Hungary, which were met by violence. In Australia, 2,000 people marched. In Paris, there was a demonstration and a strike, by the way. There were strikes all over France. The police and the military with fixed bayonets attacked the march, one of the marches in Paris, and the workers engaged the army in hand-to-hand combat on that May Day protest in 1890. In Italy, demonstrations were held throughout the country, and in Spain, likewise, there were demonstrations in many cities. Now, it's interesting to look at the discussions at the International. When the Second International was formed, it was, if you like, the inheritor of the First International. The Second International was founded in 1889, and the principal drivers for that movement at that conference were the United States, Belgium, France, so on. The United States was central into the international labour movement at that time, and it's important to focus a bit on that because the impression you get from the media presentation all the time is that America is a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist country, whereas America has a very rich tradition of socialist organization and of the creation of socialist parties at various times. Another statement from Engels. Engels said that in referring to the 1st of May 1890 May Day demonstrations, he said the English working class has awoken from a long winter sleep, as he described it. The police and army attacked, as I said, strikes and demonstrations in many, many cities. In Belgium, there were a series of general strikes in 1886, 1887, 1891, 1893, and they were largely political strikes in the following of seeking universal suffrage. They won their right to representation, but it wasn't properly implemented. The Second International was the inheritor of the First International, in which, of course, Marx was the central figure, but they also had made the 8-hour day an important feature of their program. Now, the First International already had raised this issue of 8-hour day, which the Second International had made into an organizing, rallying call. And it's important when we discuss that, always to emphasize the socialist and international aspects of May Day. There was always an international link between the workers of various countries. When the Civil War was taking place in America. There was a shortage of cotton, obviously, coming to the cotton mills in Lancashire, in England, where tens of thousands of workers were employed. The British government then said, or were talking about intervening in the American Civil War on the side of the slave owners in order to protect industry. But a series of meetings were held in Manchester and in London by workers and by workers' organisations. For example, the London Trades Council. Mass meetings were held, and as a consequence of that, the British government did not intervene in the American Civil War on the side of the slave owners. And that's an international aspect because even though workers were losing their jobs, there was huge unemployment across Lancashire following the shortages of cotton in the Civil War, but nonetheless, the workers opposed that. And a statement that Marx made at the time was, it was the working class of England that saved the west of Europe from plunging headlong into an infamous crusade for the perpetuation and propagation of slavery on the other side of the Atlantic. So that international movement of workers was recognized at the time for what it was. There was around the time of the First International, there was an uprising in Poland against Russian occupation. And again, the workers in London, for example, London Trades Council in particular, took action and took part in demonstrations to prevent or in support of the Polish workers. The important lessons that emerged from the May Day, we'll hear from comrades about their own experiences in the various countries. I just mentioned, by the way, in Dublin, there have been May Day demonstrations since the 1st of May 1990. There's been many protests and marches and many issues there around the issue of May Day, and it'll be the same in other countries. But the principal lesson that emerges from all of these discussions, apart from recognizing the sacrifices that workers made and the links between the May Day protests and the 8-hour day protests and socialism, even though they're all very evident, we need also to recognize that what May Day represents is that it points out to us the main and principal division in society. The division in society is between workers and capitalists. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the term working class. Like in America, they advanced this demand for save the working class and advance the working class, the middle class, because they categorize somebody who owns a house or a car or a front and back lawn as middle class. That's not the case. That tells you nothing. The only issue of class significance is where it places you in the productive process. And workers who work for a living and who have no income other than their own labor, these are the workers, these are the working class. The middle class is a kind of a term that's used sometimes to confuse people's thinking, whether they go to the theater or watch Netflix or, that kind of stuff. The kind of music they like, whether they like hip hop or classical music, that's not class, that's just personal taste. Class is where you stand or where you're placed in the means of production. And the workers are the overwhelming majority. And we must focus on that division. There's a lot of divisions in society along ethnic, national, religious, gender lines, which of course the employers always exploit to their advantage. And divide and rule has always been an approach of the ruling class and the imperialist powers at various times in history. Divide et impera. We must resist that, and we must take part in all of these protests by minorities, and in particular nowadays when there's a new issue being thrown into the mix, which is about immigration and asylum seeking. We have to fight against all of these things, but we must never lose sight of the fact that the principal division in society is not between right-wing parties and more middle-class parties, if you like, or more moderate ruling class parties. And that's not the division. The division is between workers and capitalists, landlords, of course, capitalists, and bankers, financiers on the other side. And the May Day protests or the May Day actions and demonstrations help us to keep our sight on that. We must never lose sight of the principal division in society. So even though we get involved, as we should be, in all of the various campaigns in which workers are affected, we must not lose sight of the principal division in society, which is between workers and capitalists. It's also worth noting that poverty across society is increasing all the time. And division is increasing. A whole shaft of new billionaires, I'm sorry, were created in the recent few years. And then, in contrast with that, you can see the famine taking place in countries like Sudan, where millions of people are suffering.
Well,
The
you've been speaking 20 minutes now.
Oh
But
yeah, okay,
do
Pam.
finish, because there's not a lot here, really. You finished, currently
Yeah,
finished, yeah.
okay, Pam. And the average sub-Saharan inflation adjusted income is only just above its level in 1970. So none of the major problems in society have been solved. In fact, they're all getting worse. And what Mayday does is it highlights which force is going to change that, which force is going to transform society. Now, political control by the parasitic minority of capitalists and landlords is what we're faced with. And it's easy to be distracted by other struggles across the globe from that fact. And that parasitic minority elect their own government and make sure the laws that are passed in their interests. On the other hand, the workers who represent the overwhelming um, numbers in society often lose sight of the power they have. We have the power to transform society. The capitalists are a minority, are a parasitic minority. We have the power and we want to get things done to improve and to change the lives of workers and their communities. So organized workers have the power to change society. We have to use that power to transform society along socialist lines. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks very much, Finn. That was a very interesting lead off. I shall now ask uh, people to put their hand up. Obviously, I'm not going to be too strict on time because there's, not a huge attendance, but please do put your hand up if you want to say anything or ask anything or add anything. Definitely hush. Roger.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I wasn't going to come in now, but just you know, while other comrades are gathering their thoughts, I'd make a few points. I think Finn summed up the situation very, very clearly and very well. And what we have to remember, because particularly at a time like this, when we see the world just facing catastrophe almost wherever you look, in one form or another, whether it's from the point of view of the coming economic crisis, or whether it's from the point of view of wars that are breaking out in one corner after another of the world, or whether it's the climate catastrophe or what. But capitalism is in the immediate period ahead is threatening the lives of millions and, in fact, billions of people. And at a time like this, when there's no clear, overt, and explicit revolutionary movement that we can see that is uniting the working class, it can be very, very difficult to to really understand the real traditions of the working class that are embodied in events like May Day. Or if you take the wars that are threatened around the world or that are actually taking place around the world, it's interesting that they are all created quite consciously and quite deliberately by capitalism in order to divide the working class. I remember one quote, perhaps Finn will remember it better, but there was one of the British imperialists in Ireland in the 19th century who I read the quote where he said, I have arranged to increase the animosity between the Protestants and the Catholics. In other words, explicitly um, explaining that it was a conscious policy and a conscious tactic of the ruling class to break the unity of the working class by turning them against each other. If we look at if we look at the war which could still break out because it's very, very shaky ceasefire between India and Pakistan at the present time. We can see how it was a conscious policy right from the beginning of imperialist rule to divide up the population into different sects, into different communities, into different religions, into different castes. I could give you a lot of evidence for that, which I won't take up time to do that now. But the instinctive movement of the working class was always for unity, for to break down these barriers, and it was always the conscious policy of the imperialists or the ruling class to divide the working class against each other. And that's the same wherever you look. It's the same, obviously, with Palestine, with Israel Palestine. It's the same, in this case, not the British imperialism, but in the same with Ukraine and Eastern Europe. It's the same with every crisis around the world. It's mainly British imperialism, which has whose hands are dripping with blood from the conflict that they quite consciously and diabolically created in order to divide the working class against each other. But the working class has always had at its root and at its heart that move towards unity. Um, Finn mentioned the first May Day in 1890. I would like to quote what Engels said. This was May Day 1890. Marx had been dead for 7 years at that time. It had been the lifelong work of Marx and Engels, not just theoretically to expose the crises and the historic role of capitalism, but also to build the labour movement and to play a full part in creating a unity of the working class. And what Marx said, the new International's first act was, as Finn explained, to stage an event which actually shocked the ruling class. It was the first worldwide general strike. Uh, in some countries, it didn't quite amount to that, but that was what was called. So May the 1st, 1890, opened a new era in world history. Just as, by the way, the foundation of the First International in 1864 actually inspired the comment from the Times, which was really the newspaper of the world capitalist class at the time, and they compared the founding of the First International, the International Working Men's Association. They compared that to the birth of Christianity. They said it was as important an event historically as the birth of Christianity, and in a sense they were right. But with the birth of the Second International, the Socialist International, the ruling class was absolutely alarmed. As Finn explained, in many countries it met the strike with brutality. And on that momentous May Day, Engels celebrated with pride the triumphant consummation of the historic life work of Marx and Engels. And he wrote, and I'm just quoting what he wrote. True, he said, talking of the First International, the International itself lived only 9 years, but that the eternal union of the proletarians of all countries created by it is still alive and lives stronger than ever. There is no better witness than this day, because today, as I write these lines, the European and American proletariat is reviewing its fighting forces, mobilized for the first time, mobilized as one army under one flag for one immediate aim. And today's spectacle will open the eyes of the capitalists and landlords of all countries to the fact that today the working men of all countries are united indeed. And he ended by saying, if only Marx was still by my side to see this with his own eyes. Now, he couldn't have foreseen the crisis that was to come. He actually thought that their life work had been consummated by this. And we know there was a long and tortuous and very painful history beyond that too. But the fact that May Day is still celebrated today shows that those ideas of internationalism and socialism are still somehow embodied in the bloodstream of the working class, of the labour movement. They're still part of the DNA of the movement, and it's on that that we are building our work and looking forward to the creation of a new international. This time an international numbering tens of millions, if not more. And May Day is the sign that the aspiration of the working class is still there. It has not been crushed, despite all the attempts from every side to destroy that aspiration. So thanks, comrades.
Thanks, Roger. Who's next? Do you want to respond to anything Roger said? I think you can just reply as and when you want, really, given the the fact there's nobody wanting to speak at the moment.
I think, comrades, it's worth focusing on issues like the 8-hour day from this point of view. It has not been achieved for many workers, particularly in today's conditions, with the huge expansion of part-time working. And in addition to that, what's called here precarious self-employment, where people pretend to be self-employed because the employer won't hire them on the basis of having to pay contributions and pension inputs and so on. So the 8-hour day, which was fought for in a mass movement in 80 and 90, for many workers still has not been achieved. We need to bear that in mind. And that focus needs to adjust. Now, we must also then examine reducing the working day from 8 hours. 8 hours is a long time. The original demand was 8 hours work, 8 hours rest, and 8 hours to do as you please. That was a poem that came out of the Chicago events. But some employers interpret the 8-hour day as any 8 hours into 24, which wasn't the original intention at all. And some shift allowances, which were to take that into account, have been abolished, and different rates for different hours have been abolished. So the 8-hour day, the demand of the Second International, as Roger has explained there, and the central demand of the international socialist movement still has not been achieved. In the poorer countries, unemployment is widespread, underemployment is widespread, low pay is widespread. So we demand not just an 8-hour day or less than 8 hours, which has been demanded at the present time, with no loss in pay. So employers introduced 8 hours, particularly in the States, and reduced pay. So we need to keep in mind that the 8-hour day demand still has not been won for many millions of workers. And comrades, I'm sure, can give experiences from their own countries where that is the case, particularly the increase in part-time employment and underemployment, and what we call precarious self-employment.
Of course, Sunday's no longer a day of rest because there's a day of rest anymore. It's just it's just an ordinary working day like any other, which I think is, it's awful. You need to sort of have a sort of a break in the working week, but even that's hyper exploited now. Anybody else want to make any brief comments or talk about the May Day procession they went on or anything like that? Eric.
Yeah, good morning.
Hi,
From
Good morning.
California, from the west coast of North America. Forgive the kind of just stream of consciousness. I went on a May Day march here in Oakland, California. Those maybe don't know, Oakland is the other side of the bay from San Francisco. It's part of an urban area of about 8 million people. Maybe all of you know that. I don't know. And what will shock some people, when I was working, I was a shop steward, and we had a chat list. I would post every year some kind of YouTube thing, the history of May Day. As many of you may know, this is the only country in the world that May Day isn't celebrated outside left circles or little communities of immigrants. It's really kind of an unusual thing. In an urban area, you'll see one. It's mostly lefts, some immigrant people. But here in Oakland, we had one with particular emphasis this last week on all these terrible deportations. This is It's really shocking. It's, of course, kind of incompetent and very haphazard. People that have been in the country for years and are integrated into society are just being snatched off the street and deported. Some to famously, not a whole lot, but some famously to this infamous prison in El Salvador. Anyway, this was a theme of this march: was stop the deportations. And the United States is still a fairly segregated society. Oakland is called the, in air quotes, most integrated city in America, and still neighborhoods are very, other than middle class neighborhoods, are fairly integrated. But the working class areas are either Latin American or African American or Asian. They're very distinct. And the march went through the very heavily Latin American part of Oakland. It's called the Fruitvale District. And it was lovely just how the neighbors came pouring out of apartments to sort of cheer the march on. And mostly they wouldn't even be aware of this because it's amplified by the different left sects and things, but they loved it. And so the march was maybe at most about 1,000 people, but there were tens of thousands came to sort of cheer it on. And that really felt nice. That's about all. I mean, it was largely positive. As I appreciated the talk, and I always appreciate Roger's comments. But I'm still left with this struggle. I did the best I could when I was working in my union and in my workplace. But the struggle here in kind of the heart of the empire is to just reignite the popularity of the idea of socialism among working class people. It remains kind of an estranged philosophy. It's something that's seen either as just completely unattainable or the past, like anachronistic or frightening. There's been years of all this anti-communist propaganda. It's not so much true with young people. Young people are much more open to it, and when I say young, I mean people under 40, under 35. Anyway, there's some big tasks ahead of us, but I think this Bonapartist SOB Trump is pushing things a little too far, and he's so chaotic that I think some of these repressive measures are going to blow up in his face. And I just hope that the scattered forces. I work in the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a big tent. There's many different currents there. I just hope that we can build some kind of an alternative quickly enough, because it seems like we're heading toward a real crisis here. And of course, that's really, taking the economy into public hands and demilitarization. These are really the only, I mean, there's no hope on the basis of the market. We all understand that. Anyway, that's sorry for the stream of consciousness. Thank you again very much for the talk, and I'll turn my mic off and listen.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's good to hear from somebody on the ground actually, because we're all following this in the media, but I think that's the first time I've heard anybody actually say it from the point of view actually being present when this is going on. Norma.
Thanks
No.
so much, Finn, Roger, and the contributions. Yes, I try to say to understand and how much we can do with May Day, or perhaps a May week, how we could take profit in the good sense, I mean, of what it represents for humanity, said the May Day, all the historical, as it was explained, and in the context of each country, each regions, and so on, to try to pose the problems we are confronted today with work, including non-employment, and how this can motivate more said more activity, not just in the May Day, but for instance, a May week in the trade unions, in the place of works, beyond the manifestations said in the street. I mean, the meetings, the seminars, and the practical in situ, in the work in the place works, to appropriate in the good sense this history, which is completely in the present time. It's at the heart of our set of our life, the transformation of work, unemployment for some, inequality, and the fact that we have automatizations, robots, artificial intelligence, technology set in the work, homework, these possibilities to connect. I think, at least as I have seen in France, even in the militant set or in the trade unions, and in Argentina, and what I can observe or connect with the world, I have not seen taking profit of this May events with the present situation to really expand the celebration or manifestation of the May Day, and to place also internationally the problem. It's an occasion to internationalize the problems in which each trade union or each group is concentrated to make a face everyday life and so on. I think this is a very good opportunity in some sense to elevate, vertical and transversal, with a transversality of the problems, and elevate, say, providing elements of analysis, comparison of the realities. As far as I can see, perhaps in other countries was different, this very important date of May is not so much very well exploited in the good sense by us. I don't know if with my English, I can explain really what I am elaborating, but I think is my idea today. What I mean is just elaborated now in confrontation with what I have seen, and your interventions have inspired. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. Anybody else? Everybody's very quiet this afternoon. Finn, do you want to add anything? Finn, do you want to add anything?
I think that's a very good point that Norma has raised there, about how to exploit May Day, how to transform May Day from what it is, which is kind of a formal gathering of union activists marching on the streets. Today should be transformed into a significant day, and there's two aspects to it. First of all, it's international. It's an international recognition of the organised labour movement and the way in which workers depend on each other internationally to create the force that would transform society. So first of all, it represents an international movement of labour. And the second thing is it provides an opportunity to show where the power rests in society. Workers have the power in the factories, in manufacturing, in transport, in energy, in water services, in the social services. Workers create all the wealth of society. And yet, society is run in the interests of a minority of people who don't work, whose wealth comes from their ownership of the means of production, ownership of land, where they can use rent and stuff like that to make an income, or banking, commerce, and finance. So that small group of people run society in their interests. They have their own political parties, and they make sure that the laws that are passed defend their interests. We don't have that. And the labour movement, which is where the power rests, does not reflect that power. And May Day is an opportunity to make these points internationally. And there's a danger that we could just march around the streets as a ritual. In fact, that's what May Day used to be before it became a labour movement day. It used to be a peasant day. Floral tributes, looking after the Roman goddess Flora, and garlands and dancing and merriment, because it was the end of winter and the beginning of spring. But that's what May Day used to be. But even then, it almost had a kind of workers' connotation, because it was the end of the winter schedules of work and the beginning of new contracts which have been signed around that time. So early May was also a time when workers re-energized about the coming year in terms of work. But we need to do something more than that to bring out, as I say, the two main issues for me would be the international nature of the labour movement, and secondly, where the power in society is, not who runs the government, but where the real power rests. So even though Norman was a bit reluctant to use the term exploit, it's fine. We should use May Day to the advantage of the socialist and labour movement. So I think that was a good point to make. If there's no further contributions, and that was the concluding remark, I think it's a very significant point. How can we use May Day to accomplish the aims that we have for the transformation of society? But I'm sure other comrades have insights that they might want to share with us.
Well, Norma, you put your hand up again. Do you want to say something else?
No,
I think
I do not want to monopolize.
You just agree. You have actually put your hand up.
Another word. And yes, thanks so much, Finn, for this. I plan to go, I mean, to my colleagues and comrades with this proposition to make for a May Day, I mean a May week, or I mean a May motivation for or a month, set a motivation for real transversality of generations, because it's very important also for young generations to know those who already worked or have the experience, and I mean real to go in a deeper advantage, and in connection with the realities we are living, and in connection with the international situations and the history and the actuality. So I take this, I mean, for me, this this meeting today, which I have not elaborated this before, I mean, really, I want to communicate to you that I will make a proposal for in my, I mean, around me, I mean, all the connections I have for in France, in Argentina, I mean, around the world, to try to, and then we can of course, with Wina connect, to try to organize a more, a more important event of transformation of reality around the May Day, which can be a May week with, as I said, theoretical, practical, international, local, and national. So I thanks very much. It was for me inspiring talks what you made today.
Thanks, Norma. Dominic?
Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. Dominic?
Yeah, just demuting. just thinking through my mind about Norma's suggestions and what the reaction would be at work. As I see it in Britain anyway, the situation would be you'd be told to take your cards. Because I think the thing that we've got to take on board is the capitulation of the trade union leadership as far as any fight for the conditions of the workers in this country. I'm not saying it's wholesale, but it's very, very big. And I think that one of the things that we could take up on the question of May Day is the recapture of the workers' organisations by the workers themselves. Far too many trade unions, from what I can see, have got full-time officials who've never worked in the tools, who worked in the jobs, and not experienced in the struggle that people have on the shop floor, and that we really need to start the campaign that the trade unions themselves should be run by the workers themselves. You should have workers' control and management within the trade union movement, and I think that's something that we should put on our banner, because without that, you're just going to get a situation where full-time officials are going to say, well, you know what the situation is, things aren't, right, and so on and so forth, and we should just, do the best we can, but what you're proposing is ridiculous. That would be the sort of response you'd get from what I've seen with trade union leaders in the workplace. The employers won't accept it, so we can't do anything about it. So I think the whole question of the working class and the organised working class taking control of its own organisations is something that really got me thought about.
Thanks, Dominic. Anybody else? Anybody wants to come back in again who's already spoken? Well, so I think this might be just a short discussion today.
It was Temus Demetriou. I think Temus, you raise your hand.
No, I did not raise.
No.
Sorry.
There was a hand on my screen, but it's the cursor. Right. Well, I mean, there's no point in prolonging this if we're, we're kind of talked out. Do you want to make some closing comments, Finn?
Yeah, the ruling class were never happy about May Day. The Labour Day in America is in September. In Ireland, we had a campaign in the Trades Council some years ago to make May Day a public holiday. And that was a campaign for a number of years. This is going back maybe 15 years or so. And the government conceded that they would give an extra day's holiday to workers, but not on May Day. It's now called the May Bank Holiday. It's the first Monday in May. They didn't want to give recognition to the fact that the Workers' Day would be given public recognition. In Spain, they used to have a festival for St. Joseph the Worker. Apparently this character was a carpenter in the Bible. So rather than recognise Workers' Day, they celebrated the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. That had some currency in Ireland for a while too. So then ruling class never were happy to allow the workers to recognise their power in society by making May Day a public holiday as such, the Workers' Day, and they picked other days instead, such as Labour Day in America. So we have to take that back. We have to make May Day our day, reclaim May Day for the workers, and attract people towards the demonstration. So it's not just a formal march around the streets with a few banners, but represents power and excitement and interest and new ideas and the enthusiasm that a social society should be able to generate. For example, in the first May Day, the first protest against the killings in Chicago back in 1886, the protest march in England was chaired by William Morris, the socialist and artist, socialist leader of the Labour movement. He chaired that meeting. And we should also try to make May Day and the period on May Day a festival for communities, so that it's not simply a matter for people at work, but the communities that they represent, and make May Day an exciting event and a festival event. There's plenty of festivals that we celebrate, but why not May Day? Why isn't that a big, interesting and festive event for workers for communities and for families. So there's lots of ideas here we need to explore. And again, going back to the word that Norma used, we must exploit May Day. But the main lesson for me, and it's for all the comrades, is that May Day should bring out the real divisions in society, which is between, it's a class division. It's not about ethnic, racial, gender, national. These divisions exist and they're all exploited. But the principal division and the fundamental division in this society is a class division between workers and the capitalist, landlord, and financier class. So for me, that's the main issue to take from the meeting. Transform May Day into a workers' day full of excitement, confidence, new ideas, and link it as well to the concept of socialism, because that's where it came from. It was the Socialist International that gave us May Day as an international public event to express the power of the workers. We need to go back to that understanding and that recognition. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Finn. I can just see, Norma, have you put your hand up on purpose this time?
Just a word. Some of them have been already well expressed at the end by Finn. So just to say precisely that is the word, the concept of work, and the concept of working class, and the concept which is the basement of this May Day. In my mind now, a May more than a day. And what have been said also about trade unions, also in my mind, trade unions are wide. I mean, there are transformations in several countries about the trade unions from the basis, and not just one trade union, of several trade unions. So all these dynamics, I think that is, I mean, in very kinds, very positive. I mean, not just bureaucratic or so. I think that we have work to do for this work day and work class, and not just, I mean, a celebration, but a transformation to exploit in the good sense. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Norma. So thanks to Finn for doing the lead off, and thanks to everybody for contributing. It's a pity there aren't a few more here, but we will, as usual, be posting this online after. So if anybody has missed out on the discussion, they'll have a chance to catch up again. So with that, I shall now move on to Roger, as usual, about next week.
Yes, right. Comrades, next week we're having a discussion on imperialism. There's a lot of confusion about what imperialism is and what it means, and it's very much a vital issue in relation to, particularly into the rash of wars and conflicts that are breaking out at the present time. So that's the discussion next week. But I'd also like to bring to comrades' attention a very important meeting that we're having in 2 weeks' time, when we're having leading comrades from India and Pakistan to talk about the crisis, the threat of war, and the issue of Kashmir. These are very important comrades who are speaking. One of them will be the most militant and left trade union leader in India, he broke away from the Communist Party, a Marxist trade union, and formed a new union which is leading very vigorous strikes throughout the country, and it's a great honour that he's agreed to speak for us. We're also having very experienced and leading Marxist comrades from Pakistan, and I think it's going to be a historic meeting. Okay, probably the only meeting with Indian and Pakistani comrades speaking on a joint platform. So I look forward to seeing comrades at both of these events.
Okay, thanks, Roger. I've just put up in the chat the other thing that's coming up, which is not strictly a WIN meeting, it's the Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party. We're having a public meeting on the 3rd of June. I've just put up the poster for it, which I think most people here probably know about it, but if you don't, can you just let other people know? You have to register to attend the meeting, but it's looking quite good. We've had 103 registrations in a few days, so it just shows the, you know, the need for a new mass working class party. So it's there. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Roger, but I think, you know, we're very keen to promote this.
No, but just to add to that, I hope comrades from outside Britain will also come to that meeting. I was talking to one young comrade in India yesterday, and he said he was very keen to come. One of the speakers, by the way, he was telling me that his favourite film director in the world was Ken Loach. And when I told him that Ken Loach was one of the speakers at this meeting, his eyes lit up and he said he definitely wants to come. And yes, we've got a great lineup of speakers, activists, and I think it could be quite a crucial meeting.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Well, that's the end of the meeting then. Thank you all for your attendance, and we'll say goodbye now. For those of us in Britain, we can go out and enjoy the sun. Okay, bye.
Comrades.
Thank you. Thank you.